being able to hear myself, which is not good. Okay, so Steve, does it appear that we're rolling?
Yeah, it appears that we're streaming to YouTube.
Yeah, I see numbers. Okay. I'm closing that YouTube window. Okay. Ira, nice to see you. Where did he go? Yes. Nice to see you, and we will be starting the program in just a few minutes. And I expect I hope there's going to be a mad rush for the door in in a few minutes. Let me find out where Smita is, because I think she's coming.
I just confirmed that the YouTube stream is running.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that, as always.
Let me turn my captions on. I'm trying to remember how to do that. Oh, there it is. Request that the host enable live transcription for the meeting.
Enabling.
Okay, let me try it again.
I can see it.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
I don't remember how to view if there's a waiting room.
There is a waiting room, and when I look at participants, I see no one in the waiting room at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. No, because Ira was in the waiting room and I let him in. I mean, everybody has been in the waiting room, but me and you. And I know that Edwin's coming back. And I think a couple of the other people who were at dinner are coming back.
Nancy, how many people are usually in these events?
You know, it's really hard to say. Sometimes we get like 12 and sometimes we get 35 and very occasionally we get 70. And I have not figured out how to decide predict which of those it's going to be.
And I'll just observe, I'll make the same observation I always make, which is that it's important. That's partly why it's important to record the meeting, because it's easier for some people to experience the meeting recorded later than to attend at a particular time. So I enjoy having the recordings done.
That's the hope, is that everybody can see everything at their leisure. Yep. Hi, Hunter. Hi, Francesca. We're going to give people a few minutes to arrive. And I also was going to tell Steve, Ted's not going to be here. He's in the hospital, but I didn't get what he's in the hospital about. But he sounded really low energy.
I'm sorry to hear that. We spoke on the phone briefly the other night. Yeah, we have 2 family members that just contracted the COVID in New York City.
I hope they're vaccinated and they're.
Well, one's a child, but they're both doing okay so far.
So crazy. Okay, here we go. There's Ted.
And Nancy, as usual, after you start the meeting, I'll probably drop off and you can text me or phone me if you need something urgently.
Sounds good. Okay. Your people are showing up. Yes. We are happy. Here's one of the dinner participants.
Hello, Ted. How are you?
I had some surgery and I'll be all right.
That's good.
This was not a scheduled surgery.
Oh, it's I have an infection that started in July, and now we got all these bracelets because I've got little
oh my goodness
on me and everything. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So we'll see what happens.
That's a dedicated volunteer right there.
Showing up.
Here we are. You see hospital room and everything. Right there.
That's probably a first for BayCHI.
Yes, it's the first that we know that somebody's in the hospital while the meeting's going on.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I'm going to give it a couple more minutes because I know there are a couple people I'm expecting who are not Jan, who I know is delayed. And okay, but here's one of the people that I was thinking of.
On the,
You say what?
yeah, but they won't miss too much, I hope.
No. Okay. Should we do the clapper thing and we're gonna
Yeah, do you
start?
have slides you want to show for the
Uh,
beginning of the meeting, or?
There
I
are
can-
some slides.
There are slides. Let me find the slides.
They're in the same place as always.
They're in the same places they always were. Don't go away. And I will find you some. Oh, I know. I hid things away here.
If you just put in shared with me,
Just a second.
I could even bring it up, I guess, and do it.
Oops, I know where it is. Ready? Hi. No.
Shall I admit Catherine Cooper?
Go ahead. Admit anybody you can. Okay. I'm in my wrong identity. I'll switch over to the other one. Just a
Okay.
second. Oh, you got it? Ted
Yeah,
found
yep.
it first?
I could even.
There we go. Beautiful.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Nancy Frischberg, and I'm going to welcome all of you to BayCHI this evening, where we are going to admit people in the waiting room and talk about EPIC, the conference, and the organization. And so we're calling it EPIC Redux, a recap of Ethnographic Praxis in Industry Conference of 2021, which was just held in October. And we're delighted to be able to welcome the 3 co-chairs, 2 of whom are present at the moment, and the third one is going to appear magically in about 10 minutes, running from meeting to meeting today. We are BayCHI, and that means we're the Bay Area we're part of the special interest group on computer-human interaction, and we happen to be a regional part of that special interest group located in the San Francisco Bay Area. The whole thing is part of the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, which has roughly 75,000 members, of which the CHI group is its, I think, second largest special interest group, the largest being SIGGRAPH, which some of you may have heard of before. And BayCHI puts on these meetings without charge, although we're very happy if you would like to join us in paying $20 a year to support the activities of the organization. We have a big community, we have monthly meetings, we have some birds of a feather, and the current one that's recently been vitalized is careers in CHI. And we have several open volunteer positions. Thanks, Ted, for moving us ahead. I'm eager to replace myself as social media and publicity person. I don't think I'm really the chair, but I'm functioning as the main person doing it, but I would be delighted to get another volunteer to help. And Steve is working with a team to update our website, which hasn't been updated in 20 years. We also entertain other birds of a feather on specialized topics, whether they're ones that we've already started and are going to reinvigorate, or some new topic altogether. And I'm mentioning some of these other volunteer positions that we've put up on the slide here, like meeting reporter. After the meeting, we have had people who do sketchnoting or other kinds of narratives about what each meeting included, as a way to sum it up and not leave just the abstract for the meeting in the historical record of the calendar. Always interested in finding a video producer who will help us post-produce some of these programs, and getting the Ted has coined this term experience creator for our volunteers. And so we're looking for a coordinator for wrangling all the BayCHI volunteers. I think that's the fair term. So the steering committee is meeting the first Thursday of the month these days at 7:30 in the evening. Anybody who is interested in BayCHI and its future can join the steering committee. You don't have to be a member or a current volunteer. You can be an interested party, and we'd be delighted to have you join us on the first Thursday of the month. But now I'd like to introduce to you two out of the three co-chairs for EPIC. And maybe I'll take a word to say, I said this in the dinner, and maybe some of you have heard me say it before. And that is, when I think about EPIC, I think, oh yes, definitely my organization. I'm very interested in it, and I must have been at all the meetings. But in fact, I've only been at the last three. So I have this vicarious, imagination of myself as having been at a lot of them. And so I think that's a good thing. The reputation is living up to my expectations. There are a lot of people showing up at EPIC, and more interesting ideas coming forward. So I thought that it would be fun for us to talk about what happened a couple weeks ago. And even though the co-chairs are extremely exhausted from the planning and the execution, hurrah, great job. Tell us how you decided on the theme. I'm going to introduce Sam Ladner and Jamie Sherman to the group.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you with the big story of it, because that's a Jan story.
Okay.
It is a Jan story. We came on, both Jamie and I came on after the theme, the idea of the theme had already been created. But I can tell you what we know from Jan's own experience. She, as many of you know, she's a fellow with the Institute for the Future, and she's done a lot of anthropological futuring so far. And because of the location of the conference being in San Jose, which we can talk about later as being a physical place or not, it was a wonderful way for us to kind of explore how and in what ways. Oh, there's food here. Yay. Oh my goodness. I have to eat because I haven't eaten. How and in what ways the anthropology of the future became very, very relevant. Jamie, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think, as Sam said, we the theme itself was something that Jan had already established, but I think both Sam and I were pretty excited about it, both because I think so much of the work, certainly for myself, so much of the work that I have been doing over the last 8 years since leaving academia and joining industry was really interested, at the very least, in ways of thinking about the future. And here's Sam joining.
Jan.
Good to have you here, Sam. Jan, sorry. We were just trying to speak for you. Is that the question was how we came up with the theme, and both Sam and I were like, we didn't come up with the theme. Jan did.
Okay, I'll jump right in it. Thank you for your patience. My students had more questions, and I knew they would have more questions. So technically, our class got out at 7:30, but I know we never actually end at 7:30. The truth is, I think part of what motivated me to jump in and volunteer as co-chair was the opportunity to take to force this theme on EPIC. And that's because I'm a fellow at the Institute for the Future, and my practice is around ethnofutures and anticipatory anthropology, and I've been doing that gig since I was a grad student. And it struck, and the one thing that I've been doing with EPIC pretty consistently in working with the tutorials and working with practitioners is to try and sensitize them to the many ways we are already doing things that are about the future, whether it's strategic planning or design, that frequently our practice has implications about the future. but yet we're often not that intentional or conscious of that. We don't think about what are the skills that you need to actually be thinking about the future as a practitioner. And we don't have the vocabulary and the consciousness to do that very effectively. So I wanted to have an opportunity to kind of bring that to the forefront. And so I had my theme written up before I had a hotel, before I had the permission of the board to even have it in San Jose. So as soon as they said, oh yeah, San Jose is a good idea. Do you have an idea about the theme? I had a full page already written up.
Excellent. So I realized that we're playing too much of the in-crowd thing. I'm going to have to be more conscious of that. The theme for EPIC this year was anticipation. Right.
And of course, the other advantage of that, particularly after we were kicked off out of the real world into online, is that that anticipation, because of its potential connection to things like science fiction and storytelling and the visualization of the future, lent itself to an online environment actually pretty well, because it is such an intensely visual experience that we could play with it in really interesting ways, like playing with digital technologies like Spatial Chat that would make you feel like you were just a little bit occupying 20 minutes into the future. And so that it all kind of fell together in some pretty compelling ways.
Cool. And so I feel like the theme then played into your choices about keynotes. And is that true? And if so, how? And did Jan, since you had anticipation on your mind, were you the one who wanted certain keynotes, or how much interplay was there among the three of you?
I think there was I will just jump in and then let other people talk. Sorry, I just taught a class and you know how that is. So I think when I think of ethnofuture, when I think of the intersection of ethnography and the future, I think there are a couple of important skills that are in ethnography, in that sort of anthropological imagination or social scientific imagination, sociological imagination, that are important in being good at thinking about the future. And one is thinking with some complexity and some systems thinking, that you begin to look for integrating multiple things. You don't try to simplify, you try to integrate and synthesize and see that bigger picture. But the other secret sauce, I think, is to try and not fall into a normative future. The idea that there is the future and that you're predicting it, but instead that you're anticipating multiple futures, and that maybe some of the futures you should explore aren't going to be the ones that the dominant culture loves and accepts. And I think that impulse to get us to and plus, we're thinking of this in 2020. If we're not thinking about how do you hear the voices of the people who don't usually get heard, then you were in a coma in 2020. So we wanted to bring that sensibility to how do we select keynotes that would really bring that message home.
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to say that, despite the fact that you had your Jan had her theme written before she even started, I have to say, I was the third person to join as the third co-chair, and I felt like I think it was remarkably open, and we had when we were thinking about keynotes, the first thing we did, which I think was really wonderful, is we had a conversation about what we wanted the keynotes to do and what we wanted that to be and what our priorities were. And then I think we pretty collectively brainstormed names of the kinds of people we were looking for. And it felt to me in general, but keynotes specifically, definitely felt like a very collaborative process. in terms of how we identified who those people were and how they realized some of the objectives that we had around kind of bringing multiple perspectives, creating provocative kinds of conversations. We wanted people that would give different people something to think with in terms of reflecting on our own practices, or perhaps inspiring a different perspective than we normally might use. I think those were some of the objectives that we had in terms of thinking about who we wanted to speak.
I'm just looking at our old notes here, guys, and talking about it. I mean, Jamie, you're right. It just fell into place. Like, Jan's theme really lent itself both to what Jamie does on a daily basis and what I do on a daily basis. So we went right into it quite easily. And when we thought about keynotes and we thought, okay, we want to bring other futures into the room, it wasn't even that hard. We just started looking online, the three of us, and we created a list. And I'm trying to find like the actual thing that says, let's make sure that we get this person and this person. And we skipped that and we went right to the list, and we already had a list. Like, we just put stuff in this list already. I mean, we had some, high profile people that were like, no, actually that didn't even write back, but we had a nice coherent list. And then we had that conversation of like artistic artsy versus, like practitioner artsy versus academic. And we wanted that mixture. Like, we wanted people to have people who studied, what we ended up getting with Ebony Thomas, who's she studies science fiction and she studies children's fiction with a fantasy lens. And then we had Sarah who does all that actual art, right? We just the balance just made itself work really easily for us.
Cool. Okay.
So would it help to, because this is sort of an inside conversation in some ways, to even talk about like who our keynotes were?
Absolutely, please.
And what they talked about?
Yes, please.
And probably, I think I had it there. I'm just going to throw something into the chat so that you all could look at it, which is, the page that talks about the program, which makes sense. But we had 4 keynotes, and we designed, which is a lot of keynotes. We started out with a Panthea Lee, and again, we were trying to represent different points of view, different perspectives. One of the things that EPIC was trying to do this year was to kind of go beyond the sort of corporate industrial practitioner perspective and recognize that you could be an EPIC practitioner who works with nonprofits, or an EPIC practitioner who works with governments. That it's a much bigger universe, and that people kind of pop back and forth. It isn't like you're all going to end up working for Google. So that we wanted to broaden that conversation with our keynotes. Panthea Lee works with nonprofit organizations, international nonprofit organizations, and is actually quite critical of them because of the kinds of biases that they have about the futures that they imagine that they are building, as opposed to the ones that the people themselves would like to build. And so her vision is much more participatory and international, and also one that brings in the perspective of a woman of color. And she's very conscious of that perspective and wants to make sure that that voice is heard. Obviously, Sarah Ellis, who was in Europe and was someone that Jamie was working with. She was from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and she was really thinking about the future of mixed reality and the future of sort of audience experiences, because she does this marvelous work where she's looking at life on both sides of the stage in many ways, and in creating virtual experiences where you actually see the performers covered with motion capture, working as actors live, and then you see the virtual reality in which they are immersed. And the example that she talked about a lot in her keynote, and the one that many of us experienced during the summer, was an kind of a sidebar to Midsummer Night's Dream, where you're experiencing life with the fairies. And it was interactive with the audience.
I thought it would be.
And so the audience is such that the audience could kind of tell the fairies where to go by where they moved in virtual reality. And that sort of VR interaction is perhaps the future of the audience experience, which, coming from the world of theater, is a really different perspective. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas was the person Sam just alluded to, who studies science fiction and is really thinking about the whole lens of Afrofuturism and how you bring in storytelling as and recognize that a lot of our job as ethnographers is as storytellers. How do you then become involved in restorying in such a way that it does include those different futures? And we ended it with Jason Lewis, who does work with indigenous AI, and he works in both as he works with communities of both indigenous artists and also with indigenous STEM people to think about how do you take the sensibilities of indigenous worldviews and bring them into the development of AI. And his most famous work, and the one that he referenced in his keynote, was Making Kin with the Machines, with the idea that there is an indigenous sensibility of making kin of non-humans that could be inserted into the development of AI and other technologies that would reshape how we think of those relationships rather than one of dominance and control. And so we deliberately selected those keynotes to kind of provoke new conversations among the EPIC people in ways that were maybe different from other parts of the program, which were often kind of revisiting the kinds of things we do on a day-to-day basis as practitioners in case studies and papers in PechaKucha.
Right. I was just going to say that there were several kinds of venues, case studies, as you say, papers, and I pronounce it PechaKucha, but I know it's a Japanese word that's been adopted into English, and it's fine whatever way you want to say it. And I know that the EPIC crowd says PechaKucha because I've heard that for a long time. I'm sure you had many more entries than you could actually accommodate in the time allowed. But I think the other interesting thing, and if we could get a little bit into that meta conversation I foreshadowed before about how it seems like you occupied 2 weeks with the program, but you didn't stuff those 2 weeks. You had a lot of breathing room in the schedule. Can you talk about that a little?
I'll take the schedule because that was my
that was Jamie.
my headache, my brain exploding experience. That was something I worked on pretty closely. So I think that we felt like one of the opportunities around being online was the opportunity to be really global, but we also really felt like what EPIC is all about to us is bringing people together. And so we wanted to make it possible for people in different time zones or different parts of the world to experience the conference at the same time. And so we organized, and we're also very cognizant that people, the fact is that when people, actually, Catherine, can you mute? Sorry, you're talking. Thanks. So we also really, we're cognizant that people are actually balancing work and being at the conference, that when people go to online conferences, they're often balancing. And so the way that we organized it was so that we had 3-hour blocks, and every 3-hour block was designed to be at least livable for people in two of the three regions that we defined, and the regions were really broad. So it was like, you know, north to south, north and, you know, from North America all the way down through South America, Europe all the way down through, you know, I think it was Africa and India, and then the Asia
technically, yeah,
Pacific.
India
Yeah.
was kind of shoved over. Yeah.
For India, it gets a little bit of the raw end. But in any case, that was the reason for the gaps, was so that we could actually, so that any given participant could be present for two of the three-hour blocks. So you could have a block in the morning and a block in the evening, and then you might be asleep for the third block, whatever it was. And that way we felt like we really got maximized the time that we could spend together, and maximize kind of the ability for different people in different parts of the globe to interact. So, you know, if you were in North America, you had time with people in Europe, but you also had time with people in Asia, and vice versa. So I will say it kind of did make your brain explode, at least my brain kind of explode. And we spent some time on a user experience perspective, actually thinking about, what does the journey look like if you're in San Francisco? What does the program look like if you're in London or in or in Mumbai? What does the program look like from Queensland? So we actually did take the time to kind of translate that back into the individual journeys through the conference. Which might have been why my brain exploded trying to do it, but it was actually it was a great experience.
Right. And so, but you didn't, now you chose not to do repeats of various talks, right? So that if I'm in San Francisco area, I'm seeing, I can go to the morning session and the evening session, but I can't go to the middle of the night session. But that middle of the night session is not going to be repeated again, right?
No, we felt both because of the complexity, we felt it was partly, but also, and initially when we started this, I had a vision of there being viewing parties where say in North America, we might view the overnight material together. And we did actually post the video so that people could go back and watch, but we never were, I think organizing the viewing parties turned out to be one too many things to do. And so I still think it was a good idea, but it wasn't going to happen.
Not everything in 1 minute, right? But yes, as
Yeah.
Jan's comments, the recorded material is still available. And I think that if people join EPIC, the organization, they will have access to your recording.
That's right. That's
and
right.
so that's going to be part of the general library of EPIC, right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So what else did you guys want to talk, the three of you want to talk about in helping us understand? So what I'm hearing from you, and I think what I experienced also, is that some of these things, like the keynotes, were especially connected to the anticipation theme. And then some of the case studies might or might not be as connected.
Oh no, everything was connected. Everything
Okay.
was connected. When there's a call for papers for EPIC, the theme is part of the call for papers, and it is a peer-reviewed conference, and so one of the criteria that we give our reviewers is relevance to the theme.
Got it.
And so we ask them to rate the proposed paper, case study, PechaKucha in relation to the theme. We did have some that were interesting, but just not theme oriented.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure, and it's interesting, Jan pointed out one of the things we also wanted to kind of work with is having practitioners that may not work at, big tech companies, for example. So we had a nice theme of, we had a panel looking at civic tech, and then we had a PechaKucha that was specifically looking at, policymaking and planning for the future, with policymaking being sensitive to socioeconomic class. And then, of course, we had the keynote, talking about, working with various levels of, you have academia and you have practitioners and artists. So, the theme of anticipation was woven through the entire program and part of what we really wanted to get across.
Cool. Okay, I'm hoping that we're going to hear from a few of the people who are in the audience who may have been participants in the EPIC program. although not necessarily, but participants like me, that is listeners, not presenters. And whether that all came through, I'm curious how well that came through to folks too. I want to give you a little bit more time if you need it to talk about other aspects of putting the program together. And when this section is done, I'm going to ask for comments from the audience also. You can jump in with questions and comments.
It might be worth talking a little bit about spatial chat. That was something that I came in, and part of one of the things that I felt really strongly about is that I love in-person conferences, and I go to conferences oftentimes less about the content than it is about the people that I meet and the people that I see. And one of the real challenges for online conferences is actually that they are so focused on the content, and it's very hard to get that experience of kind of running into people and ducking out and sitting in the bar and blowing off the actual session, right, in order to have a substantive conversation about something that interests you, or mobbing the presenter but because you have something that you really want to talk to them about. All of these things were really challenging to find in an online environment. And I think that one of the interesting things when you think about sociality online is the way it kind of fragments social interaction in different kinds of ways. So Zoom is great for certain kinds of things like this, presentations and meetings. It's not great for that. And so we thought that there was an opportunity to explore something different, something that enabled a different aspect of sociality online, something a little bit more fluid. And we actually, the co-chairs and the EPIC sort of people, staff, we did a number of field trips. We actually went to a bunch of different platforms, and we tried them out. We met in them, we explored them. Some of them were really fun and really wild. They were a little bit hard to control. If you weren't a gamer, they kind of were challenging. And so we were looking for something that had that right balance of being relatively easy to pick up, not too expensive because our budget wasn't huge, but also that enabled some kinds of somehow more dynamic or more fluid kinds of interactions. And that was how we ended up with Spatial Chat as kind of what we called it our auxiliary platform.
There's inside. There it is.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And the way it works is it's actually, for those of you if you don't know it, it was built on the API that was created by High Fidelity around spatial sound. And you appear as a kind of, as you can see, as a small dot. And really you're just like an icon. You can pick yourself up with your mouse and move yourself around on a background. And the closer you get to people, the louder they become. But if you move further away, they become, you stop hearing them after a while. And it just creates a very different kind of social interaction that is much more fluid. It's much less. We were saying it kind of enables you to reenact all the same social anxieties you have in an actual room of breaking into a group.
Exactly.
So you get all that experience. But nonetheless, we felt like it added something and enabled some of those freestyle conversations that you can have after a session where you actually want to talk about something you heard.
This is after this. This is the example of this is Ebony Thomas after her keynote. She stuck around, and this is the equivalent of getting mobbed at the lectern, right? So you see, I was surprised at how many people popped up and showed up, and you can do all sorts of interactive things in it, like people just out of nowhere. I didn't do this. People were putting pictures of wine, and it was a GIF of pouring wine, and people are putting pictures of beer, and so we were having drinks with one of our keynoters and, chatting with her and she was gamey for it. She stayed behind for like 45 minutes and we all had chats, and it was very, it was almost like we mobbed her at the lectern.
It was like, and you could have hallway conversations in effect, as long as people manage to find their way into Spatial Chat.
Well, and Jan did a very good job of reinforcing that almost every time she spoke. She said, go to Spatial Chat, there's the link. And the EPIC staff made sure the link was posted on every session. So there was an after session. And I think that was another part of the sociality that we didn't actually, as co-chairs, talk about ahead of time, but implicitly we just did. We acted like hosts. So we went to Spatial Chat and we encouraged people to follow us and we introduced people to each other and tried to minimize the real life awkwardness that people experience.
Sorry. I was just going to say, it felt a lot like when you have a party and you worry about whether people will show up or not. That was definitely, I also definitely recreated that experience for myself. Do I have enough popcorn?
Yeah, and like, I'll go check the other room to make sure everybody over there is doing okay. And you should come to this room, and making sure that the volume on the music was exactly so, all of that was actually happening in Spatial Chat as well.
Right. This is the Spatial Chat that I experienced at EPIC is quite similar to the Spatial Chat, not called that we used in our summer school thing we used GatherTown, and not identical, but much of the same functionality. And so that was a fun thing to realize, but it did take some encouragement to get the audience to follow us in there and to be spontaneous with one another and to themselves make appointments with each other. Well, we have this, here's a great coffee table or coffee conversation. You included, and I can show this to the audience when I share, you included a bunch of things for informal encounters and networking, and encouraged people to both offer themselves as 15-minute coaches and to get 15-minute coaching from somebody on any kind of a topic. It didn't have to be EPIC narrowly defined. It could be on anything at all. And I was delighted people made appointments with me that we could work out those times, even though I had a kind of limited availability to show up. So that was fun.
That's nice. That's nice.
Yeah. And
we were
really different topics,
Yeah.
Yeah. So that part was great. All right. Do people in the audience here have any questions for Jan, who's a professor at San Jose State, or Jamie, who's on the staff at Netflix, or Sam, who works at Workday? Don't all talk at once. Okay, we will allow you to ask questions of them a little later if they can stay up that late. We'll see.
I'm already in my jammies,
so you're ready. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to another part of our conversation tonight, and that is I'm going to invite two of the people who are present, Marie Mika and Arvind Venkataramani. I'm sorry, Arvind, I've done this before. Venkataramani. Is that close last time? Yeah, okay, good. And they're going to give us a view of what it was like to present at EPIC and in the particular session that they had. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about how you incorporated this theme of anticipation into the presentation of your recent work. Mika, come off mute. There we go. Marie.
Sure. That's an interesting question for me. When I read about the theme, I just quickly, wrote up my application essay, so to speak, and was thrilled to be accepted. And then when I realized that we were going to have to present, I actually started reading a lot of the literature, a lot of Jan's articles, and a lot of, futures research. And I wished I could go back in time to earlier in the year and do research that was more directly informed by the futures research that I was reading. And that, I've been working for a year on helping to create our virtual primary care experience. And I wish I could go do it using more futures research and thinking much more expansively about what virtual primary care could be and pushing the boundaries of existing technology. As I was reading Jan's articles and watching the videos, there was this image of a little baby in a little bassinet, but it had the VR headset on and the wrist and the ankle. I don't actually know what those do, but it's a really jarring picture, and it really kind of forces you to you have an emotional response. You think, why am I responding this way? It's forcing me to articulate, beliefs and values that I hadn't really questioned or considered before. And I wanted to go back in time and, use those kind of artifacts and prompts and talk to people about what the boundaries are of virtual primary care, meaning, would they be receptive to, a doctor going on a house call with them and touring the refrigerator and medicine cabinet and things like that? Or show me where you sit, what's your desk area, or, what have you. And I'm integrating some of that into a study I'm doing right now as I pivot to behavioral health in my company. I'm definitely going to start with some of these more futures thinking and ethnofutures methods to inform that research.
So tell us what your talk was about, your case study was about. Mm-hmm. And you've already told us that you work for a healthcare organization, right?
Mm-hmm. It's funny, my organization went through 3 names over the past year, and now we're happily Included Health, which I'm happy to say it's much more intuitive. But yes, I'm a staff researcher. I should have started this at Included Health, and it's been my job over the past year to help the team design the virtual primary care experience. And we launched on 1/1, and the work that we did and presented deeply informed that. And it was kind of the early part of the journey, especially creating the personas that have been guiding so much of the marketing and design work.
And so, Arvin, what was your role in this project?
Marie and I did 2 different halves of the research, focusing on 2 different populations. We'll walk through some of this. It was really interesting to sort of, have our approaches and lenses, look at 2 different groups of people and then see the contrast in how they were understanding the same experience, and how they were sort of, reacting to, this future that we were proposing to explore with them, or at least try to understand what that feature meant.
So go ahead and tell us all about it.
All right. I'm screen share. Marie, take it away.
All right, thanks. And this is a slightly abbreviated version of our presentation at the conference, Designing Virtual Primary Care, Desire or Dread, How Structural Forces Shape the Anticipation of Futures. And the COVID-19 pandemic has been transformative, to say the very, very least. At least in healthcare, it necessitated an almost instantaneous and coordinated effort among clinicians and insurance companies to deliver virtual care of many kinds due to shelter in place, as you know. And it also shifted many healthcare companies' priorities and dramatically accelerated the drive to create increasingly virtual healthcare. So as we've been talking about creating a virtual primary care VPC experience, so that's having an exclusively online primary care doctor, it was already on the long-term roadmap for Included Health, but the pandemic made the company realize at the time to create and launch this services now. So before actively designing the VPC experience, as we're doing right now, the design and product teams wanted to conduct exploratory research to address the following foundational questions that you can see here. What keeps people from engaging in primary care? And we ask that because we know that primary care in the United States is low and trending lower. And how might virtual primary care address the primary care gap? So the main hypothesis going into our research was that a rural socioeconomic population, as we called it, would be best served by and more eager for a VPC, given their greater distance from clinicians and healthcare facilities generally, and due to fewer options in rural areas for doctors who are like or understand me, so to speak, with regard to ethno-racial and gender identity, sexual orientation, and the like. And this hypothesis existed in theoretical contrast to an inverse assumption about the urban population that closer geographic proximity to clinicians, and a greater diversity of clinicians to choose from would render VPC less necessary or desirable. So to explore these questions, we conducted 39 remote deep dive interviews with the rural population, and that is relatively lower socioeconomic status, or SES. And with the majority living in rural and small towns, those are who are most likely to have to travel considerable distances to a primary care provider, and or for whom financial and geographic access might be problematic. And we conducted online focus groups with the urban population, those possessing a bachelor's degree or higher, higher SES, employer-provided health insurance, and urban or suburban residents. And across those populations, we discussed participants' personal definitions and practices of health, their experience with clinicians and institutionalized healthcare, and about their experiences with and hopes for virtual care. So with regard to the findings, not only were our original hypotheses debunked, they were found to be insufficient in that they did not account for any kind of distrust or skepticism in primary care in and of itself. It was the urbanites who far more enthusiastically anticipated the shift to a more, if not entirely, virtual care experience. And our rural participants were comparatively more skeptical, if not, wary of primary care generally and the potential for delivering it through virtual means. And we ultimately found that socioeconomic status, not geographic location, has the greater impact on definitions of health, engagement with healthcare, and anticipation of virtual primary care. So our two populations are no longer referred to as rural and urban, but low SES and high SES. So the differences between, thank you, Arvind, the low SES and high SES populations primarily lie in deeply entrenched beliefs about and prior experiences with institutional healthcare, and to a lesser but still very important degree, technological milieu, with the low SES population likely needing far more persuasion to engage in institutionalized healthcare and with virtual primary care in the first place. And these participants, as you can see in the screen, they often don't even see institutionalized healthcare, much less primary care, as valuable or trustworthy. And reducing access barriers, distance, time, cost, is not in and of itself going to persuade them to engage with institutionalized healthcare. These low levels of trust lead them to see primary care, virtual primary care, that is, as a diminished form of in-person care. Thus, even though they recognize the convenience offered by virtual care, many are unable to imagine a desirable future involving it. And then in contrast, the high SES population was much more optimistic, and the healthcare features they anticipated did not involve dread. Their initial remote appointments in the main resulted in satisfaction, if not delight. And these positive experiences are paving the way for greater anticipation of VPC. And all agree there's no turning back to exclusively in-person medical care. Arvind. Handing it off to Arvind.
Come off. Yes, this came off mute. So to summarize, essentially, then we had to reframe what we thought and expand our conception of what we thought were the concepts that were shaping primary care seeking behaviors in this context. So to our original list of access as a determining factor for behavior, we ended up adding 3 other factors that we're calling the individual determinants of health. Trust is, of course, trust in institutionalized healthcare, as Marie was talking about earlier. Theory of health is really how participants conceptualize how they understand health. What are their signals of good health, signals of ill health, and what kinds of actions contribute to ill health or good health. Interestingly, also a sense of agency seems to be really important. And agency is the ways in which participants conceived of themselves as having an ability to do something about their health, an ability to impact it in some way, an ability to positively affect it, and whether they thought that their locus of control over their health was internal or external. So these 4 determinants of health gave us a roadmap for articulating ways in which to intervene in the in people's primary care behaviors and to encourage more primary care engagement. There were 4 different levers that we were able to construct a intervention framework around. The implications for this then was, in terms of how we want to use this information, is twofold. First, to design for the user's belief system, and secondly, to actively design to change the user. So designing for the user's belief system meant that we need to acknowledge and mitigate mistrust. We need to inform their theory of health, and we need to encourage and support action. And designing to change the user meant we are trying to move them along from their relationship to where they are towards a more healthier and a more positively impactful relationship to primary care. And while doing so, measure these results over years, not over weeks. One concrete way in which we are helping our organizations do this is by helping them think about how one kind of persona can become a target, and by serving that one persona, they slowly transform over time into another kind of persona who has a more beneficial life situation. And the takeaway is to tie it back to the theme, Nancy, also to ask, answer one of the questions you had asked earlier, how did we experience this writing? We had, we initially just sort of submitted this talk with a relatively vague idea that this had something to do with futuring. But it became clear as we were writing, and we were really starting to do, that the theme was helping structure our understanding of the work that we had done. And so two takeaways sort of really emerged as we were trying to write to the theme, which is, one is that we should think about inquiring into what people fear just as much as we inquire into what they desire. And very often there's an implicit practice or an assumption in UX work that desire is what drives change, and that that's what we should be exploring. And the idea of what people fear, exploring that both, shows how the future is something that is very contested. Secondly, it also became very clear that we need to study how people become something, not just who they are at this point in time and where they want to go, but how did they get here, in order to understand the entirety of their journey and the entirety of how they understand and conceptualize the futures we are exploring with them.
Very intriguing, I think. And I'm so glad you were able to squeeze it into a smaller space for this presentation this evening, although I know you have much richness in the longer presentation, and perhaps people will have a chance to look at that when it's up on the EPIC site in the future. But this is really intriguing. I mean, I get definitely how your personas changed to SES only and not so much about urban and rural. But this business also of you're taking on how to affect primary care at the same time as you're addressing who's going to show up for primary care, why not everybody? And then you found out why not everybody, right? Very intriguing. So that was a case study, and you were in a session with other case studies, is that correct? Yeah.
That's right, yes.
Cool, okay, great. Are there questions from the audience for Arvind and Marie about their topic or about how they put together a presentation and what they're going to do next? I'm not seeing questions at the moment yet. Okay.
Could I throw in an observation though?
Please, please.
Because I love the way you ended it with the insight that part of the anticipation framework was to think about transformation, about becoming, and that was because that is exactly one of the things we were looking for. Is methodologically you don't just look at what was or even what you're seeing in the ethnographic present, but also what could be implied by consequence for potential ethnographic futures. But I do think next year's theme of resilience, it's almost like you could have submitted this for that as well, because that she says, because that transformation piece, I heard people talk in Spatial Chat afterward. It's like, ooh, this is so exciting. I mean, it was scale back in Melbourne, and now they're doing anticipation, and next year is resilience, which kind of leads from one to the other. And that transformational piece is such an integral part of resilience that it would be a nice thing for the people who participated this year to kind of take that and run with it in the direction you took it.
So now, wasn't agency the theme in Honolulu? So they worked that in too, see? So I think that that's a great point, because it shows that any particular project may have a number of facets, and some of them could fit with the epic theme. It's not that you started out thinking about, Jan, you always start out thinking about anticipation because that's your specialization, but not everybody necessarily frames it that way. So I think that's fun that we're finding ways that the epic theme can stretch and expand and fit all these different things together under it. Okay, I'm going to show.
I contrast that really sharply with renewal, which was the theme in Savannah.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody remembers that one. I wrote a paper for that one. Was it a paper or was it I think it was. Yeah, no, it was a paper. And the difference between anticipation and renewal is anticipation is understanding that the sand is still moving. And it's going to go in multiple directions, and there are no future facts. There is a future fact. It doesn't exist, right? Whereas renewal is about reaching back and going, oh, if only we'd thought about that before. That's why I like anticipation so much more.
I like it. Okay, great. I want to leave space if anybody else wants to ask something. Jamie, how is Netflix making use of ethnographic research?
What's kind of astounding is actually that I'm doing the work that I'm doing is more, I would say, traditionally anthropological in many ways than I expected, and that I've been doing in many years. I'm not the only one who does ethnography at Netflix. There are a few other ethnographers who are talented and brilliant. And so for example, I spoke yesterday to somebody who's using ethnographic methods to think about audience, and also to think about Netflix is investing in very they have a strong strategy around local and really driving local content in local places, so that it feels like people, when you watch something in a country other than the United States, it also feels like it came from the place where you live. But she's been finding some really interesting findings about how people in different locations think about local in relationship to entertainment. I myself work on something we call content intelligence. So I focus internally on how the people who work in content acquisitions think about and make decisions about content that we will make or buy. And so I do ethnography right now with those content acquisitions teams in order to help the tool makers and the data scientists really understand how Hollywood and content makers think, what their mental models are, what their daily practices are, what matters to them, in order to do some better translations, I think, than we have around the ways that data and content and creative processes actually think quite differently. The ways that data people who work with data think about what can I do with this information that I have, tends to conceptualize the object of creation much differently. And so I'm working to create some translation between those two spaces and to help the one better understand the other in order to drive a more effective relationship. So hopefully that answers the question.
Lisa, is that sufficient for the moment? Because she asked the question.
Fascinating. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
We've
I'm-
also, sorry, I was going to say, we've also been having really substantive conversations about anticipation and the ways that are, so how we think about what do we anticipate in the ways that in our practices and in our metrics and the things, and where do those lead? So that's also pretty exciting.
Cool. So you're using the theme to work with your own staff and
It's true.
colleagues at Netflix. Nice. Yeah, I mean, that's really a great outcome for a conference, that you can find things that are useful immediately to your own workmates and your work situation. That sometimes it takes a long time to figure out how to integrate the stuff you've learned. So that's wonderful. I wanted to share one more piece of the program with the group here who didn't necessarily attend. I think PechaKucha is a great format, and I keep thinking about how to make a BayCHI meeting that's all PechaKucha from various contributors in the community. And so the people who are not necessarily familiar with this format, it's 5 minutes. And I think usually it's 20 slides at 20 seconds per, right? So that you speak over in a continuous way, but you have a certain limited number of images that you're going to show in your 5-minute segment. So 20 seconds times 20 is 400 seconds, right? Divided by 60. So you can tell it's brief. And so the one that I've picked out to show you today is the one from Catherine Mezzo, who works at Lowe's Home Improvement, and she's a senior user researcher there, and she's on East Coast time and couldn't join us today, but I warned her I was going to show this piece, and so let me show it to you, and if you have questions for her specifically afterwards, we can be in touch with her, but not simultaneously with this conversation. So let me share my screen and thank the folks who were on for the tech rehearsal for reminding me how to make sure you're going to be able to hear this audio. Okay. So this is April, who's going to introduce Catherine, and then we'll hear Catherine's piece, and then I'll stop it because there is more content after her that we're not going to listen to today.
Your point behind just the analysis of some of these things and the science,
So
right?
that's the outro for the
Definitely.
previous talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our last and final PK, but certainly not least, is a piece by a young woman by the name of Catherine Mezzo. Catherine's piece is called Do Not Fear Mistakes. And in it, she speaks about ethnography as an improvisation. So with that, can we show Catherine's piece, please?
I work in tech, but I'm not a disruptor, and I don't want to be. I'll let that sink in. Disruption as method or process is a myth we've created, but it doesn't always lead to innovation, at least not user-centered innovation. And I'll go one step further and say innovation isn't even the goal, but really just an outcome of what we do as ethnographers. What we actually do and what we ought to emphasize is improvisation. With incredible respect for those who make us laugh and like anyone who's needed to get unblocked during an ideation session, I love a good yes and. But when I say improvisation, I'm thinking of jazz. Jazz is at once technical and fluid, and like ethnography, it's also anticipatory. It reveals what has been until now outside our view. And when I speak of jazz, I'm thinking innovative, iconic, recognizable in 2 notes. Ba-dum. And in the space between the notes. Kind of blue. Miles Davis didn't set out to innovate. He and Bill Evans looked to modals to frame the musician's improvisation, riffing on a classic blues form rather than relentlessly pursue the speed and technical proficiency that dominated jazz in that moment. Whether or not they set out to do it, Kind of Blue represents a shift. By 1959, the year Kind of Blue was recorded, they had both been experimenting with modals for many years, and the space race was in full swing. Our remote gathering is evidence that we remain in the midst of a global pandemic, which has rocked our world and showed us both the costs and possibilities of disruptions. Innovation work in the tech space didn't stop with the pandemic. It accelerated and morphed to bring order, remove obstructions, and create new ways of connecting. In my current role, I work on associate software products that facilitate interactions with customers. In stores, plastic guards protect associate and customer alike. A simple, scrappy innovation for safety that makes collaboration between associate and a customer in the software much harder. Instead of creating a disturbance that drastically alters or destroys the existing structure, I suggest looking at ethnography as improvisation, centered on mastery, planning, and community. First, mastery. Improvisation is not created in a vacuum from nothing, and the mastery required for great improvisation comes from developing the necessary skills. The now legendary musicians who performed on Kind of Blue went in as studio musicians. They weren't seeking to innovate or disrupt either. They just were bending the rules because they had mastered the rules, and they wanted to see what opened up when they bent. Honing your craft as a musician takes countless hours of listening, playing, practicing correct embouchure, developing dexterity, and learning rhythm. If you're lucky, somewhere along the way, someone corrected you. Similarly, ethnographers can't simply download templates to achieve mastery. You get better at interviewing by interviewing. Your observations become richer and more precise the more you do it. Even seeing ethnography as a skill or a methodology discounts the value of the discipline. With a nod to Jay Hasbrook, ethnography is a mode of thinking and seeing. As we take in the world around us, our observations, understandings, and questions evolve. Not unlike a jazz performance, the place and time in which our observations are situated yield different outcomes, even if our research instruments look the same as ones that we used in a previous study. Is there anyone listening who at the end of an interview hasn't said to the respondent, "Is there anything else you'd like to add?" Next comes planning. Technical mastery is not enough. Technical skill is about learning best practices, but ultimately mastery is about knowing when rules should be broken. It's been said that creativity may only exist because of the boundaries that artists push against. Towards the end of the 1940s, the bebop tradition Miles Davis was coming out of focused increasingly on complex chord progressions, speed, and technical mastery. The use of modals on Kind of Blue creates a more open system, which you can hear in the first notes of the album. The simplicity of the guidelines allowed the musicians to not be tied to specific progressions, but move more freely between each mode. The musicians never got lost in the space because they always know where home is. In my own work, due to COVID, we were not able to iteratively test our designs until late in the game. And when I did make it to stores with our prototype, we didn't have a controlled environment. Since we were on the floor, customer interruptions were constant. In the midst of testing, thinking and seeing like an ethnographer kicked in. As if by autopilot, my notebook divided into 3 sections, one for the primary interview, one for documenting observations and interruptions with the primary respondent, and one for other observations around the various technology the associates shifted between to resolve said interruptions. Everything from software to card readers to pen and paper. And while grounded in existing knowledge and strong technique, the practitioner, like Coltrane, needs to be able to go off script. In the end, going off script yielded the greatest insights. What these user interviews really showed was the ability of associates to move fluidly between tools in a high-pressure environment. Planning and mastery is what makes us nimble, agile even. Have a plan, build on familiar ground, and allow your training to kick in. Miles Davis said, "It's not the note you play that's the wrong note. It's the note you play afterwards that makes it right or wrong." Even in the recording sessions for Kind of Blue, they didn't strive for some kind of perfection. The performers didn't just hone their craft through practice and creativity and isolation. And so this brings us to perhaps the most important element of improvisation, community. The note that follows can be from the musician playing the misplaced note, but it can also be through another musician who folds the new version into the song later. While we think about the band leader or the soloist, the performance is truly an ensemble. The interactions of each performance are central to the anticipation of the unforeseen. Rather than viewing the chaos of the prototype interviews in the store as a mistake, I leveraged the success of ethnography as a mode of thinking and seeing to double down on store observations. Each week leading up to product launch, I attended training sessions in stores to document the questions and concerns that came up in anticipation of the new way of working represented by the tool. I also learned about the cultural dynamics between the front lines and corporate ahead of the next round of interviews. Those interviews were designed intentionally as contextual interviews with specific roles and responsibilities for designers and business partners to participate. After each interview, we debriefed and practiced the ethnographic mode of thinking and seeing, giving me a chance to study my stakeholders as well and help them evolve their understanding of what matters most to associates. Ethnography is squishy. We weave together a narrative from disparate and at times discordant data to make sense of what is and speculate on what might be on the horizon. While we can move fast and break shit, we don't have to.
Around starting a biological
Oops.
family.
So I think we hit it. That was great.
I think you had some great examples of that, right? I mean, there's a lot of science.
Okay. Hold on a second. Okay. Thank you, April, and thank you, Catherine. So let me get back to where you all are. Good. I have to say that I thought this was a great example of a PechaKucha. She made a consistent analogy and she kept playing on it and giving us greater depth of the comparison between the jazz musicians and the ethnographer on the floor, in the planning session, and all the different places that the ethnographer was. So I really thought that was a great example for people who may not have experienced PechaKucha or PechaKucha before. But I wanted to see if there were other reactions to it as well. I saw nodding a little bit from the window that I can see in. Let's see. I don't know if that was your favorite PechaKucha or somebody's.
I'd be interested to hear from this audience what you thought. Of course, I feel like we're definitely close to this, having been part of the process. I really did like this one. There, in general, I find that PechaKuchas or PechaKuchas are nearly always thought-provoking and interesting. They kind of the format forces a certain kind of poetry and aesthetics that I find invigorating. I really liked, kind of like you said, the way that she threaded her theme throughout, that she didn't just sort of pick it up and drop it, but rather really came back to it and really wove it through in a very musical sort of way, I think. And I really appreciated, in relationship to our theme, this idea that the reification, or the way that we think about innovation should be toppled off its little pedestal, that it certainly has, at least within tech companies, for sure, that there's an opportunity to knock that down and think about other things that we could be aiming for.
Cool. Other comments? Well, the reason I chose this one partly was I thought it was delightful and it's brief, but also that I think that it's a real challenge for us in many cases to be able to give a 5-minute presentation that has that much content, as well as the driving analogy that or metaphor that drove this particular talk and allowed us to take in so much in such a brief time. So that was exciting for me. I love this format, but I'm scared of it too, and I haven't really pushed myself to do it much. I did one on behalf of BayCHI right at the beginning of when I joined the steering committee. So that was like a dozen years ago. And I went to some conference where BayCHI was invited to talk about itself, but it was all lightning talks. And I talked about us as a team of volunteers, and that we constantly are renewing our volunteers and refreshing. And so I hope I can send that message out to the world, because we're still interested in new bodies or people who've been on the edge for a little while. I mean, I've been in the audience at BayCHI almost since the beginning, but didn't join the leadership team until much later. Now I'm looking at who's left here, and I see there's at least one person, Suzanne, who's been a regular at EPIC. And maybe you want to tell us a little something, if you would, about your experience this year or in previous years, and how EPIC fits into your rhythm of life.
Nancy, hi. Good
Hi.
evening. So EPIC is where I go to connect with community. It's my tribe, right?
Right.
Yeah, so regardless of what job I have at the moment, it centers me, and I get to think across the profession and think more deeply about applied anthropology and its importance.
Great. I'm waiting for more comments, more challenges. And have we enticed anybody into looking into EPIC as a possible conference that you might participate in, which you didn't know about before?
The thing that has always drawn back to EPIC, beyond what Suzanne was just saying about the tribe, which is true. And Suzanne, if I'm not mistaken, you actually told me that I wore a blazer that reminded. I'm not mistaken. I think you said that to me once, which makes me think about this PechaKucha at an EPIC.
A blazer that reminded her of what? I missed the end
of jazz.
Of jazz. Oh, I didn't hear that.
I believe that it was who said that, and I looked at it.
Could have been both a blazer and your shoes. Come on.
My shoes, of course. Right. Yeah, maybe combination. That aside,
that doesn't sound like a very virtual thing to talk about somebody's shoes, right?
That was a real EPIC. That was a face-to-face EPIC. The thing that keeps bringing me back over and over again is the papers, and the quality of the papers is always very high, and they're inspirational. They show you what is possible in the applied setting. The research that we do on a day-to-day basis, not all of it is paper worthy. And it's inspiring to see people who take their position where it's an applied and you're asked to do a certain number of things. And oftentimes you have to cut a lot of corners. And yet we still aspire to this level of quality, and you see it year in and year out. You see the quality. And it's a forcing function for me. Jan and Jamie had to talk me out of writing my own paper this year, because I did an ethnographic futures process, the project, the year previous, like the 8 months previous to this, and I thought, oh my God, I got to write this paper, and they talked me off a cliff, which is good. I can't believe I was going to even consider that, because it was a ridiculous idea. But every year I say, oh, I can write about this. Oh, I can write about that. And maybe I do, and maybe I don't. But the aspiration it's like a little fake rabbit that I'm chasing after as a greyhound at the track.
And I've got to pitch in as somebody who has written a lot of academic papers over the course of my billion-year career, but or at least what feels in my bones like it. But EPIC curates things and makes them better in a way that puts academic paper peer review to shame. I mean, academic paper peer review, you may get a little bit of feedback and then you're abandoned. That is not the way it's handled at EPIC. You have a team of people that is, and certainly a point person, but also people in back of that point person who are reading and rereading and suggesting and bringing you through the process on the paper that will be published in the proceedings and on presentations. I mean, it is a kind of collaborative curation, which just is not in any of my academic organizations. And so as snotty as my academic organizations can be about their own intellectual status, I think EPIC puts them to shame.
Well put, Jen. Well put. That's true.
Lisa, I love that characterization that you put in the chat. If it's not true, if it's not true, then it definitely should be. I love it. I agree, actually, Jen. I have to say, as somebody who's worked on as a curator, it isn't a trivial amount of work, but there is a real back and forth. I think it's something like 2 drafts before the final, where you really get substantive feedback on the papers. So as both a writer and as a reviewer, I've done both. It is remarkable, and I hadn't even thought about it. So I think that's true. I also think that I think that some people, so it's a real combination of people. Not everybody that comes to EPIC is an academic. I definitely think the papers is one place where those of us who left academia, may love what we do, not want to go back, but nonetheless have a little bit of, we miss certain kinds of intellectualizing that we don't get to do in our everyday. Because nobody wants to hear me talk about Foucault or Bourdieu or even why it matters. That I get to do that at EPIC and speak to my tribe and and sort of think about or talk about what I'm doing and think about it in a little bit of a different sort of way. But I also want to point out that not everybody does that, and that one of the big efforts that we've made over the past few years that I've been volunteering on the reviewing side is think about being inclusive of people who come from design backgrounds, who come from data science backgrounds, who are interested in the ways that ethnography can speak to some of the questions or some of the efforts and how to incorporate that. And so I think the case studies and the PechaKuchas are also ways that create more opportunities for that dialogue across and in different ways of approaching the challenge. Oh my goodness, it's been so long since I thought about Anna Devere Smith.
Right.
So how do you come down on Anna Devere Smith? Is she an ethnographist or an ethnographer at some level?
I think of her first and foremost as a theater artist. I think that she used, I wouldn't claim to be, like I said, it's been many years since I really I was a theater artist before I became an anthropologist. So my context is early on in that transition. To me, I think of her as somebody who uses what I might think of as ethnographic methods to really investigate the people that she thinks about, but she uses those and creates what I would think of also, you might think of as ethnographic fictions, right? So I think that that's probably, again, it's open to debate, and I'm not claiming to be an expert in her work, but what I recall from it, I probably would think about it in the genre of ethnographic fictions and a kind of, perhaps an ethnographic, there's an ethnographic flavor to the kind of performance art that she creates. And I worked with a performance artist who did very similar methods. And using interviews and ethnographies to create her show. So
it makes me think a little bit Sam, of the Wire, and its a written predecessor, The Corner. Which is not, it's not individualistic, it's very community oriented. I don't know if anybody read The Corner, but it is a thick description of like David Simon and somebody else, whoever else wrote it, thick description that predated The Wire. And so it was creative nonfiction, you could call it, a little more like Truman Capote type, but very thick description and very sociological in the way that it situated the lives and experiences of the people who, and if you read that, that's nonfiction, and they're real people embedded in it. And then if you see The Wire, you can see the characters and the themes of what they observed on The Corner being embedded into ethnographic fiction of The Wire, the real, and then there's amalgams of characters and then situations and structural challenges.
Lisa, I'd be interested what you think now that we've said what we thought.
What I thought about, I'm not quite sure what I thought. This is fascinating to me. I'm very interested in that, theater and film, and its use of with people who are using ethnographic methods. You know, I'm learning from you guys. Anna DeVere Smith, yeah, but I'm thinking there's a trend I see. Jamie, I'd really like to hear from you. I see a trend in film and television especially, applying these methods and extracting from them stories that then affect people, and they go out and make different decisions in the world as a result of seeing that entertainment. That's why I was so interested in what Netflix is doing in this area.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that there is a long tradition of integrating research and I'm going to call it research broadly, and I'm going to call it also realities of different kinds into entertainment genres. I certainly see, you know, I think there are lots of different flavors of that. I think that what Anna DeVere Smith and a few other folks do is one flavor of that. I think there are other kinds of reflections and kinds of the integrations of an interest perhaps in what's real. But then also fictionalized realness that I think are less linked to ethnography. And I'm not entirely sure the extent to which Anna DeVere Smith, her objectives are really ethnographic exactly. If I recall very distantly, there was some, you know, that was one of the debates around her work. But I do think it's a really interesting point. I'd probably have to think about it more, but it's a really provocative thought, so thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Jamie, for taking on the challenge there.
I threw something a riff off of this that kind of brings it back to the anticipation stuff, is that your question reminded me, Lisa, your question reminded me of a direction in the way practitioners tell stories about the future and its connection to a more theatrical way. I mean, we've been talking about sort of ethics academic arms and, you know, the way we write papers or case studies or tell stories in this. But there is a tradition within future studies, and especially future studies that use ethnography, that connect to the real lives of people, to take those stories and those images of what people fear. I think the language that was used, I think Arvind may have used it, of the language of what people dread and what they desire, and then transforming that into an immersive theatrical experience. And IFTF does that all the time with its clients, is it creates a kind of immersive theatrical experience, either by
experiential prototype. Experiential prototype is a real life example of experiencing that character of the things that people described and envisioned, and then making it real and evoking that experience.
That's right. So they're artifacts from the future, or sometimes actually bringing people into the field, and then they're sort of shifting their reality so that they're seeing kind of a layer of future-y possibilities on top of the things they're seeing in the present. But just that theatrical immersive experience is a huge part of that psychological restorying of ethnography.
That reminds me of like a kind of I would say fierce debate around that kind of immersion and enactment, because one of the critiques of that, of course, is sort of lies in the idea of the techniques of the body. So the habits of a body, are really something that we grow up with, so we are socialized to sit in the way that we sit and swim in the way that we swim. And so
there you go with Bourdieu this and Bourdieu that.
It's most. No, is it most? Wait, who am I? Where am I? I have to like think back to who am I quoting at the moment? So I think, but sort of thinking about, so there's this question of like, if I immerse myself in this kind of ethnographic fiction, am I actually experiencing what a person might experience from that context?
Yes.
Because my body doesn't move that way, and yet I also do feel, as somebody who comes from a theater background, that placing your body in particular kinds of positions, even for me as a researcher, becomes informative. It raises different kinds of questions about my experience in relationship to theirs and what it is like to inhabit a specific space, or even there's a theatrical practitioner named Tadashi Suzuki who talks about coming from Japan, who talks about building a character from the ground up. It's in the way that you contact your feet hit the ground, right? So thinking about the ways that your body inhabits space as a mode of being in the world, and how that affects you. So I have very mixed sort of feelings about that. Thank you. I'm like,
no, I don't think you were
my
thinking,
brain shut down.
I don't think you weren't talking about Merleau-Ponty. You were talking about how Bourdieu. You said habits.
No, I said techniques of the body. This is gonna be, it's techniques of the body.
Oh, technique. Did you say techniques of the body? Oh, okay.
I didn't say it, but I was referencing it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is most. I'm not. It's not.
You're not crazy.
I actually do remember this now. Yeah, it is most.
Those French embodiment people.
Those French people, they're all they all blur
I was thinking
together.
about the when Bourdieu talks about how one blows one's nose, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is an embodied experience that isn't entirely involuntary. Like, you do choose to blow your nose, but you have that that class consciousness is embedded within how you make habitual actions like blowing your nose, right? So if I take you, Jamie, and I take you to the place on the corner, let's say at the in West Baltimore, I take you to the corner and you blow your nose, you're going to stand out like a sore thumb.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
But it kind of goes back to ethnography as improv, that if you can put people in immersive situations and get them to inhabit, even if it's not accurate, but get them to inhabit something that is provocative and not them theatrically, that decenters them enough to consider alternative possibilities. And so I think, and which is hard to do just by talking. The words don't quite push them as hard as that sort of more theatrical.
That's true.
Storytelling.
That's true. Yeah.
I love the conversation. I want to respect the time, and we're at 9 o'clock. I have one more question that we can say. You're allowed to say that's too much. Save it for another time. And that was my question about. So why do I have to know the way to San Jose for this?
You don't.
Why do we still have located in physical space names for our conferences, even though they're completely virtual and distributed?
Because it didn't start out that way.
Oh yeah, that.
I'm sorry that I'm still grumpy about that. Every time I take my walk over at Hayes Mansion or go to the Mexican Heritage Plaza, is like, wait a minute, we were going to have real places that were,
and there were going to be dancers, and
actual fun in person.
Yeah. I have a different answer to that, actually. I feel really strongly that even online, that actually online brings place in a very different way. And so for example, you, Nancy, have this nasty background that doesn't let me see where you are.
Oh, I can turn it off.
But one of the joys
that is where I am, actually.
I know, I'm just kidding.
Only it's nighttime, so you couldn't see it.
One of the pleasures of online working from home and the pandemic is this glimpse into other people's spaces. And the dog behind me, and I think there used to be a cat, no, she's gone. But the kids who come through, the partners who deliver food, these glimpses into place. And particularly, thank you. But I feel like those were important. So when we were thinking about San Jose, we really we did actually want to think about that role of place, and is there still another a translation of space and place,
a transcendence of space. Yeah,
but I don't think it's an erasure, nor should it be. I think that it's, and one of the social events that we organized, because we, as part of that social committee, one of the things that they wanted to bring, they did a whole session around renovations, because so many of us had started working on our houses, and they had finished and unfinished renovations. And so people were just posting images of their space, the things that they had done and the things that were half done. And really, I think there was a real opportunity to bring your place to the online.
That's right.
Was really, so that's why San Jose, I think, also mattered in that context.
It was where at the very minimum, where Jan is from, right? Where Jan physically is, right?
Right.
But I tended to think about it, Nancy, as like, when I think about McLuhan's concept, his tetrad, when he talks about what is obsolesced and what is recovered, right? So we have obsolesced quite a few things with Zoom, right? Zoom-based meetings, but we have brought forth an entirely new way of bringing space into, existence. And I was actually looking forward to that in many ways, and I wasn't disappointed. I mean, it was wonderful that I got to talk with Ebony Thomas about moving back to Michigan and what's it like in Michigan today and what's happening here. And I mean, that was just charming and lovely. And getting to see, Jamie's dog every day, every Wednesday afternoon, and her kids coming home from school, it's the time when kids come home from school, so there's a pause so Jamie can kiss them hello, right? That's a very nice thing. It's charming, Does San Jose still matter? Of course it does. Of course San Jose still matters.
And I think there's another piece that I still hold on to, which is, it's not just San Jose, it's EPIC is a global community, and that there's certainly the way the conference shaped up is that it emphasized that 20 hours of programming of global community and the 20-something volunteers that were global. But the Bay Area is an actor in that doesn't usually get recognized as a distinct actor, that the Bay Area community produces a lot of people that are really central to the core mission of EPIC, but don't have much of an identity about that. I mean, we don't really think of ourselves as, we have our regional things in which we think of ourselves, but not in these other larger contexts. And I wanted us to have an opportunity to do that with EPIC, is to be recognized that the Bay Area, is a community that is a pretty big contributor.
Idea. Like the San Jose School of Anthropology, as opposed to the Chicago,
School.
Yeah, exactly.
You mean that those incredibly practical people over in San Jose?
Exactly right.
Well, I'm thrilled that we got to do this, and I appreciate everybody staying up late tonight for us. Even if 9 o'clock is not that late for you ordinarily, I know it's late, especially right after daylight savings times disappears. And we got a couple of people from the East Coast to help us to make this show go on. So I'm not going to hold you any longer. I appreciate everybody who stuck with it for the whole time. And I'm delighted that we got to have this conversation with the BayCHI audience. So thank you so much.
Thanks for hosting us, Nancy.
Next month, second Tuesday of the month, a brand new program, lots of fun to be had. We'll see you then.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.